Basically, the idea is that you need a guarantee that the result sets will have very specific metadata. If the shape of the result is different than what you expect, you need it to fail. So far, in earlier versions of SQL Server, there was no real answer to this kind of need. So SQL Server now has 3 supported options for the with result sets clause. The first one is with result sets undefined. This is the default, which means that never mind what the shape of the result sets returned by the stored procedure and whether there's any result at all, there will be no error related to the shape of the result whatsoever. So again, that's the default for executing stored procedures. And then with result sets none. This option means that you have a guarantee that no result set will be returned from the stored procedure. If a result set is returned, then SQL Server generates an error and the batch terminates. And then the third option is with result sets, and then you define what the result set is. This option specifies the metadata of one or more result sets, and you get a guarantee that the result sets and their number will match the metadata defined in the clause. Otherwise, SQL Server will generate an error. And this is the option that you can use to essentially redefine the shape of the result set that is returned. Now, for now, you can pretty much only rename columns and cast types. There are some improvements that people are talking about, wanting to enhance this with result sets feature in future versions of SQL Server, such as being able to add columns with default data, exclude columns from the output, reorder columns, and convert columns by using functions so that you have control over the conversion. So maybe we'll see those kinds of enhancements in future versions of SQL Server. All right, let's take a look at some code that shows how you can use with result sets. The AdventureWorks 2012 database includes a USP get employee managers stored procedure that takes a single parameter, an employee ID, and returns the direct and indirect managers of that specified employee. Because the data includes a hierarchy ID data field, you can see the hierarchy as it relates to that selected employee. Okay, so this code shows the normal way of executing that stored procedure. I'll execute that, and as you can see that employee 8 has this management structure. So the employee is Diane Margheim, however you pronounce that. And you can see the direct manager is Dylan Miller. And then it displays Dylan Miller and his direct boss, and his direct boss, and her direct boss, and so forth. So you can see the hierarchical structure of the organization as it relates to Diane. All right, so that's the normal way of executing it. But let's say that you want to shape the results to provide more meaningful column names and change some data types to make them more consistent. And this code shows one way of doing that. And it uses the with result sets option here. Now, it's very important to understand that this code doesn't change the stored procedure itself in any way at all. It just shapes the result set returned by that stored procedure. Now, this stored procedure, the USP get employee managers, returns a single result set. So I only need to shape a single result set here. And so in this case, for the most part, what it's doing is it's adding spaces to the results. If we go back over here and look at the results again, you can see that, and it changes some of the names. So recursion level is going to be reporting level. Employee ID or business entity ID is going to become employee ID. And then we're specifying the employee first name and employee last name, and then adding spaces and so forth. So you can see how it's changing, shaping the data. All right, so I'll go ahead and execute this code here. And now you can see that we have the same basic results, but we have different column names, and behind the scenes, all of the data types are consistent. And the nice thing about this is that you don't have to have access to the stored procedure code in order to reshape the results. So anybody can do this. Okay, you can also have stored procedures with multiple result sets. So this stored procedure here is a custom stored procedure that again uses data in the AdventureWorks 2012 database, and it lets you search the product information using a wildcard character on the product name. But what's different here is it returns two result sets, one with basic product information and another with the number of orders that include each product. So a little bit more complex select statement. As you can see, there's a single parameter called product name, and so it's going to return the information for just a single product. So I'll go ahead and create that within the AdventureWorks database. And then this shows the normal way of executing the stored procedure. So it's going to return all of the products that have wheel in the name, as you can see. And this is a case-insensitive collation on the table, so we're getting, even if it has an uppercase W, that matches. And then also gets information about the number of orders for each of the products. Okay, so that's the normal so-called execution of that stored procedure. All right, but once again, say that you want to shape the results by renaming the columns, and mostly by breaking up the names into multiple words separated by spaces, but doing things like changing name to product name in the second result set. And so this code will do that. So I'm once again executing the stored procedure, passing in that wheel wildcard. And then now I have two sets of result sets that I need to shape. And so I just have the outer parentheses that delimit the overall result sets. And then I have inner parentheses for each result set, and they're separated by a comma. And I can have as many result sets here. If this stored procedure returned 50 result sets, I could have 50 shaped result sets here. And now when I execute this code, that's the result I get. All right, so far so good. There are limits on what you can do with the data, at least in this version of SQL Server. So here's an example of some code that's going to cause an error. And the reason it causes an error is because if you compare the two, notice that I have 3 columns here, but I only have 2 columns here. So if I try to execute this code, I'm going to get an error message that says execute statement failed because its with result sets clause specified 2 columns for result set number 1. Isn't it great? It tells you exactly where it is. But the statement sent 3 columns at runtime. So the stored procedure is returning 3 columns, but I only defined 2 columns here in the code that I executed. Okay, so the nice thing is that SQL Server's wordy error messages sometimes very effectively identify what the problem is. And so I would need to change this code before I could execute it again. All right, so you can also use the other 2 forms of with result sets to ensure that you're getting the data in the form that you need. So take, for example, this code right here. So I'm executing the stored procedure and telling SQL Server that I expect no result sets. But this stored procedure does return a result set, so when I execute it, I get this error message. Execute statement failed because its with result sets clause specified 0 result sets because I specified none, and the statement tried to send more result sets than this. Okay, so I get an error message. I can't execute this code. All right, and then here's the third form of with result sets. This form essentially says, give me the data however the stored procedure returns it. So keep in mind, this is the default with result sets when you just execute the stored procedure. Okay, so if I execute this, that just returns the raw data, the 2 result sets from the stored procedure.